What is up, Kaiju Seekers? Welcome to a Kaiju Not Ramble video. Essentially, I am just going to be doing like a semi-scripted video, not so much an essay, but as you can see from the title of the video, it is going to be an actual defense of Godzilla 1998. And the reason I'm making this video, and similar reasons why I did my previous live stream discussing 1998, is because I've always been intrigued by the aspect of in defense of 98 videos. A lot of them seem to come from different aspects of like what they're trying to defend, and part of me has always thought that they're never really doing a good job of actually defending the film, using any points that either have long been discussed or misconceptions of the film. And I want to take a shot at doing an actual defense video saying why I think certain aspects are both really well done and or are easily able to be come off as appealing to certain types of people. And that's what I'm basically going to be getting into today. And for starters, the first thing I want to come to defend is the visual effects of the film. Now, the visual effects for Godzilla 1998 are a somewhat disproportionate mixed bag, and I would say disproportionate because a majority of the effects for the time are both on par with what we saw, and as well as they are state of the art for the time, and even better than a lot of the other films that were coming out that came out shortly before or shortly after in a few ways. For instance, things like Godzilla himself, who is mostly portrayed with a CGI model with keyframe animation, and the model itself is rather well detailed, both in terms of the painted on textures as well as just given the fact that they did scan a full-size maquette. They were able to get a lot of the rich detail in there into the model, and it shows. Even in instances like during the first initial landing in New York, you can see that the fidelity of the model and things like how well it's incorporated into the physical on-site locations, as well as all the composite effects, things like the taxis and just the overall environment. It was able to match up really well and is pretty convincing for the time. And while it may be dated in certain aspects, again, for that time, it was some of the best CGI in the industry. Year before, we had things like The Lost World, Jurassic Park, which had a few daytime scenes, and when you match them up, I would say that in a few instances, the Godzilla 1998 daytime sequences do outmatch the Jurassic World or Lost World examples there, and things like how well they are integrated into the scene. And I guess bottom line, at the very least, I would say they both do a great job of integrating into their environment, specifically like with Godzilla in the rain, as well as the Lost World with their harsh, bright daylight sequences. They both do a good job. I think in a few instances, 98 still does it better. And then when you compare the nighttime and rainy day shots, they're both matched. And there's also a few sequences where 98 again outclasses The Lost World, which was, I think, amongst the best of the 90s dinosaur creature feature boom that we saw for that time. And aside from the CGI and visual effects aspects of this film, another standout reason that this film is just very much well made is the practical effects that went into depicting both Godzilla and the baby Godzillas, with a mix of practical suit effects, animatronics, and also like some other technologies for other visual effects, like I believe photogrammy or something like that. But with regards to purely the practical effects, they're all very well made and all utilized very well with the CGI in moments that it's oftentimes hard to tell for some people, because most people always just assume that it's all CGI whenever you see Godzilla, but no, it is interspliced with amazing practical effects that help you sell, or help the movie sell the monster, its weight, its agility, its character, and just so much more that makes the monster just stand out in this film. And again, it's just very well designed and very well executed in how they portray its character. The next point of defense I would have to say is definitely the character work and some of the character writing in this film. All of the characters are very well established in their traits, their personalities, the roles they have in the movie, and each one has like a nice through line from beginning to end of where their journey is gonna like lead them. And the film does a good job of relating each character, at least each main character we have, to Godzilla in some way, whether it be studying Godzilla, looking for a way to destroy him, or even just writing a story or covering the story of Godzilla. And it does it in pretty interesting ways, and by the midpoint when we have our characters converging and overlapping, it's interesting to see how they interact, because, for instance, you have the underrated and overhated character of Audrey. Now, Audrey has always been characterized as like this bitchy character who doesn't treat Nick right. And while they are correct in some ways of that observation, it's very misunderstood. Audrey's arc in particular is about learning that there is not one way to achieve success. And it starts in the beginning when we get introduced to her through Nick. We have implemented the idea that it's a long lost love. And when we see her character, she is held back by several aspects of both her personality as well as just her boss, Cayman, who is holding her back. And we see in the beginning that he is like one of the main obstacles in her journey to success. And looking at his behavior, we can see how she gets this idea that Cayman, the reason he's successful is because of his attitude and his demeanor. And we see that also her friends implant the idea of, nice guys finish last. That's the main takeaway she has. And so those two aspects combined sort of have her go into this spiral of being this impulsive person who at first who didn't like confrontation and things like that. She decides to, if it's this way or the highway, essentially. And that's where her arc begins. And we see her step by step starting to steal things, going places where she's not technically allowed. And then when she finally meets Nick again, we see that we finally get the further of the story of how she left him, and how Nick may still resent her for it. And Audrey comes back at him saying, oh, well, sorry you feel that way. And everyone's correct in saying how this is somewhat of a bitch move, to where she's putting like the blame on him. But what most people never really say for this is that she is merely mimicking how Cayman spoke to her earlier in the film, because if you remember, he came on to her and used basically like dinner and a sexual encounter in trade for like a furthering her career. And when she rejected him, he put the blame on her. He's like, well, that's your choice. And Audrey is merely mimicking that behavior, because up till now, again, she is like, it's either like nice guys finish last, and she has to do whatever it takes to be like at the top, real cutthroat like that. And so like if Audrey had naturally met up with Nick again, I doubt she would act this way towards Nick, given the interactions we saw with her beforehand. So, and then after that, she goes to steal the tape. And the scene where she steals the tape, I think, is very underrated because it is both, again, acted well because people, of course, she won the Razzie for Worst Actress, but I think it was not really deserved because this scene in particular, I think, is one of the best acted moments in the film, and it's with Audrey because you can clearly see her dilemma portrayed through not even just dialogue, no dialogue at all, just pure performance, body language, visual storytelling, where you have moments where when she discovers the tape, she watches it, realizes the scoop she has, and now she faces a decision. And you see in this beautiful moment where she looks down at the photographs that Nick has in his briefcase, and then she looks back up at the tape, and then you visually realize the dilemma she's in, and where she again is put in the place of 8 years ago, where she has to choose between her career and choose between Nick. And up to this point, it's like, again, it's like we're past nearing the midpoint of the film, which is also amazing because, like, again, each character revolves around Godzilla. And so you have these points overlapping, and you get to her arc where she makes the fatal decision to steal the tape. And then after Cayman steals her story, she realizes, being the victim of this again, she realizes her mistake, and then tries to first reconcile with Nick, but because of her lack of willingness to or aversion to confrontation, she hesitates and explicitly saying I'm sorry, because she may see herself still as justified because of the position she was in, but it's when Nick puts his foot down and that's no, and leaves, is when she fully realizes how much she screwed up, and that's her arc. And then later she redeems herself by proving everyone to Nick that he was right about his theory, which she jeopardized in the eyes of the public and the military, so she's making up for that in that way. And that is the overall arc of Audrey that I think people overlook. And speaking back to how the midpoint brings all the characters together, because in terms of pacing as well, this story, I would say, throughout is very nicely paced. And everyone will mention that the first act is the best part of the film because it's genuinely well paced and well set up. And I would say, yeah, it is, but the rest of the film is also very well paced and well followed up on, because in the beginning you have the setup of why Godzilla is dangerous, why he is this gargantuan nuisance animal, and that's where his threat comes in, because he's capsizing ships, he's overtaking a major city. And then by the midpoint we get the reveal of the nest, and now we are confronted with the idea of, we know how much trouble one Godzilla is becoming, what would happen if there are more of them? And then we go on from there, and the midpoint, I would say, only ever drags as much as any other Godzilla film will drag in the middle, because most Godzilla films and most monster films will have a midpoint where we have the characters coming together and come up with say a plan to attack back or figure out something about the monster they didn't know previously, which happens in this film. And then we get through that, we have our character moments, we have Audrey's betrayal, we have Philippe meeting with Nick, and then we start getting back into the Godzilla moments where we get amazing sequences with Godzilla versus the submarines and things like that. And then we start rolling with the baby subplot, and then back again with Godzilla. And it's all very well done. I wouldn't say no part in that drags necessarily or halts the story in any way. And again, all the characters all have some role to play, whether they're supporting casts or part of the main squad there with Nick, Adriano, and Philippe. They are like the main protagonists of this film, and like that's just overall like why I would defend anyone, or like this is why I would defend like the main story and characters of Godzilla 1998, because they're simple, enjoyable, and well executed in the story they are telling. And while there are a few beats here and there, even in the stuff I praised, to where they could have done better, it could have done like with another redrafting, or like just more to it, which would definitely like make it better in a few instances. But with what we have and the way it was executed, with its like moments of merit, I think keep it from being like explicitly bad and like not well executed in any like real way. Another character who I would say is very underrated is Nick. He is overly stated to be like the bumbling scientist type character, but that one's also not true, since Nick is a very proactive character who is very quick thinking and comes up with a lot of the ways to either study, combat, or predict Godzilla's movements. He and again, he does have that like slapstick side of him, to where he's like this somewhat awkward scientist who um it mostly just comes from his enthusiasm and genuine liking towards his job, since we see him first studying with the worms, and then he's excited about studying Godzilla. So you go from like 0 to 100 really quick with him, and I think that side of Nick is one that is not brought up as often with his character. So again, he's not this like goofy scientist that some might try to portray him as, but he's more like, again, assertive, quick thinking, and like proactive in the story. And another aspect I would want to defend is going back a little bit to the design itself and the philosophy behind it, and with how Roland Emmerich wanted to approach this Godzilla story. And it's a little bit of one and the same, because Roland Emmerich again is on the record both saying how he was not a fan of the series as a whole, nor the character as it was known at the time. And in my previous discussions, we talked about like what it really meant to be faithful to Godzilla and what his specific way was. And I would say, taking into account everything I've talked about, I still believe that Emmerich, in small parts, was still faithful to Godzilla. One reason being that he is also on the record multiple times, both during and after production, of how he did enjoy and have some level of respect for the original film itself and what that film meant. And he took from that film, in terms of story structure, aspects of the characters, like metaphors and things like that, and applied it to his own version. And so in that way, it's sort of a reinvention of the concept of Godzilla. And you see that in a lot of the different ways he spoke about his film, and that it is a reinvention of the character with a modern lens. So it's always brought up how like Heisei Godzilla was still a thing. 98 is not, or the Heisei is not a reinvention like 98 is. It is a continuation, and yeah, exactly, it's a continuation of what Godzilla is. It's a direct sequel. It's going back to the roots of the original in many ways, but in a few other ways it's still continuing the same thing the Showa era was doing, with being more fantastical, sci-fi, things like that. But with 98, it's a reinvention for the time, as if, according to Emmerich himself, if they were making Godzilla in that day and age, and you ignore both the Showa and the Heisei series with how it was, and you completely reinvent Godzilla from the ground up. Which is why, with the design, you still have the same philosophy behind it, in it being a mutated aberration, this mutated creature, a victim of nuclear fallout, and becoming this larger than life unnatural beast who is sympathetic in that way, because, in the words of, I believe it was Dean and Roland saying that it was a creature created by us and means us no harm, but if it continues to survive, we will become extinct. And in that way, it shows that the tragedy of Godzilla, which is true for the original, because because of us, he is lashing out, and with the whole realism thing to it as well. Like, it's only as realistic as any other monster movie might be in terms of things like tone and um, just how the concept is executed. I likened it more to like comparing it to like War of the Worlds or Independence Day versus like Mars Attacks. And I think that's where more so where Roland was coming from in terms of the quote unquote realistic attitude to it. But with Godzilla, it's just, what if it was made in that day and age without regards to what had been. So again, you take the same philosophy, you take the same structure, and then you reinvent it for that age, and that's the main thing, Like, it's still Godzilla, but working from the ground up from scratch, So it's not a continuation. It's not like a readaptation. It is, like, in the truest sense, like a remake. They're remaking Godzilla, and that's what that was. That's what it was. And you can even find moments in the film that are visual references and visual allusions to scenes from the original 54 film, which I would also say are completely intentional, because, again, Roland Emmerich stated he pulled the most from 54, and he said that it is like a direct remake of that film, and so he had some callbacks and things like that, moments in story structure that call back to the original, and again, in that way, that's the way he showed respect while making his remake of that film. So I want to close out the video by just saying again how this film means a lot to me personally. It was the earliest film I ever remember watching. It was my first Godzilla film, and that is a story not only just common amongst like Godzilla people in general, like people in the fandom, but especially for people like me who deeply love and or like even just like bare minimum like the film. It brought a lot of people into the fandom, both in a direct and indirect way, with people who either watched it in the theater, loved it, and then got into Godzilla, or because of how Sony got the rights to all the other Godzilla movies in the Heisei series that, again, were not released stateside in any large capacity. It brought those films back, and then thus made new Godzilla fans from those too, and even cultivated more in the fandom, because now we had a wider access to Godzilla movies. And again, the film is not in any sense poorly made. It is has amazing craftsmanship, set design, creature design. It has good pacing. It has fun characters who are enjoyable, even if they're not fully like deep characters. They still enrich you with a fun experience, and there is some level of depth to a few of them. But more so, it's just that it's a film that is, again, also a time capsule for the 90s, the late 90s, and that sort of like pre 9/11 World 2, to where there's a lot of nostalgia tied to it. And people will say that, but they'll also say, oh, it's mostly just the marketing. But no, the film itself too has a lot of nostalgia to it. It has that 90s specific camp factor to it. It has the aesthetics of, like that late 90s creature feature movie. And like, that's just why I think there's a lot of merit to it, and why it's not just a one and done, oh, it's a terrible film, objectively speaking. No, I say objectively speaking, it's a more than fine film with a lot of aspects to it that are top notch, because, it was like the first big budget American Godzilla movie. And so with that, it's going to have just a lot of just this polish to it, that in both just the way it looks and the way it feels, it has that nice vibe to it that you don't get in a lot of movies. And you mostly got that in a lot of the creature features of the time. So above all else, like, no, it's not. It's not up for discussion. It is up for discussion because you have people like me. You have people in the fandom. You have this cult fan base that has been cultivated for over 20, almost 28 years since the movie came out. And I've gotten to speak to many other fans of the film, and thankfully I've even gotten to speak to people who work on the film. I am blessed to be able to call those people my friends, acquaintances, and have gotten the chance to talk to them. And this is just an interesting niche fan base because we can get a little crazy at times, I know, but above all else, we just love a film that has been maligned for nearly 30 years at this point. Again, it's turning 28 this year, so look forward to, hopefully I can make like a cool little anniversary piece for it. But again, that is my overall defense of a few of the aspects of the film in general. And so thank you all for stopping by. If there's any more talking points, I'll definitely go over them either in the comments or maybe in the next live stream, seeing what the aftermath of this video is. But there you go, guys. My actual defense for Godzilla 1998. And until next time, Kaiju Seekers, over and out. Don't forget, guys, I am an ambassador for Advanced CG, and if you want to save 10% off your order, use code MONSTRO, found in the description below. Thanks again. Until next time.